The winter morning bit through my wool coat, the air sharp with frost as I pulled into the parking lot of an upscale boutique on Franklin Avenue. Washington, D.C.'s skyline loomed gray against the dawn, a reminder of the city's unyielding pace. I was Sarah Ashford, 44, a federal judge who'd spent 2 decades wielding justice in courtrooms where truth was supposed to matter. Today, I had a crucial hearing at 9 a.m., a high-profile case that could shift local policy, but I'd carved out 20 minutes to exchange a cashmere coat, a rare gift to myself for years of relentless work. Dressed in trousers and a turtleneck, no makeup, no judicial badge, I was just a woman running an errand. I didn't expect the world to remind me otherwise. I stepped out of my sedan, the cold stinging my cheeks, and locked the door. The boutique's glass facade gleamed, promising warmth and luxury. I'd taken 3 steps when a white couple emerged from a Mercedes parked nearby, their polished shoes clicking with purpose. The man, tall and broad, in a tailored overcoat, fixed his eyes on me, his jaw tight. The woman beside him, her blonde hair pulled into a sleek bun, clutched a designer purse like a shield. They moved to block my path, their presence a wall I hadn't anticipated. "This lot's for customers," the man said, his voice low but edged with disdain. "You're not supposed to be here." I stopped, my breath catching, not from fear, but from the familiarity of his tone. I'd heard it before in courtrooms, in whispers, in the way the world sometimes looked at a black woman and saw less. "I'm a customer," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm here to exchange a coat. I'm in a hurry, so if you'll excuse me." "You're not fooling anyone," the woman interrupted, her eyes narrowing. She pulled out her phone, her fingers swift. "I'm calling 911. There's a suspicious black woman here, dressed like she's sneaking around, lying about who she is." My pulse quickened, but I held my ground. "I'm a federal judge," I said, my words deliberate. "I'm on my way to court after this. Please don't make this something it's not." The man scoffed, stepping closer, his frame towering. "A judge? Right. You think we're stupid?" His hand shot out, gripping my arm with enough force to make me wince. Before I could pull free, he shoved me backward. My shoulder hit the metal door of a service entrance, the impact jarring, and my head snapped against the frame. Pain flared, hot and sharp, and I felt a warm trickle down my temple. My wrist throbbed where I'd braced myself, the sleeve of my turtleneck, damp with a faint smear of blood. "Let go," I said, my voice steady despite the ache. "You're making a mistake." He released me, stepping back with a smirk, as if I were a minor inconvenience. The woman, still on the phone, hung up, her eyes cold. "They're on their way," she said to her companion, then turned to me. "You'll learn to stay where you belong." I pressed my hand to my temple, the blood sticky against my fingers, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and humiliation. I'd faced prejudice before, but this being dismissed, manhandled, and accused in broad daylight felt like a theft of my dignity. Before I could respond, a security guard appeared, his uniform crisp, his badge reading Vincent Corso. I exhaled, hoping for reason. "Everything okay here?" Vincent asked, his gaze sweeping over the couple, then me. His eyes lingered on my bloodied hand, but his expression stayed blank. "I was assaulted," I said, my voice firm. "This man grabbed me, pushed me into the door. I need you to call the police." The couple spoke over me, their voices overlapping. "She was acting suspicious," the woman said. "We were just protecting the area." Vincent held up a hand, silencing them, but he didn't look at me again. He pulled out his radio, his tone clipped. "Situation's under control. Cancel any dispatch. No need for intervention." He turned to the couple. "You two all right?" "We're fine," the man said, adjusting his coat. "Just make sure this doesn't happen again." I stood there, my breath shallow, as Vincent nodded and walked away, not once asking for my side. The couple headed toward the boutique, their steps light, as if I were invisible. A small crowd had gathered nearby shoppers, a delivery driver, a man in a gray suit by a parked car. But no one spoke up. The man in the suit, his face half hidden, watched for a moment before turning away. I memorized his outline, though I didn't know why. I drove to the courthouse, my wrist aching, my temple bandaged, with a tissue from my glove box. The blood had stopped, but the wound inside hadn't. I'd spent my career upholding a system I believed in, yet that system, or the people who wielded it, had just turned its back on me. No report would be filed, no camera would show the truth. The pain wasn't in my body. It was in the knowledge that to them, I was no judge, no woman, just a stereotype they refused to see. By 9 a.m., I sat at the bench, my robe heavy, my expression schooled into neutrality. The courtroom buzzed, and I steeled myself for the case ahead. Then the bailiff called the defendants' names, Michael Johnson and Emily Carter. My heart stopped. The couple from the parking lot walked in, their faces composed, unaware that the woman they'd dismissed now held their fate. I gripped the gavel, my bandaged hand hidden, and looked at them. Justice was my job, but today it felt like a mirror, reflecting every crack in the world I'd sworn to serve. I didn't know how I'd face them, but I knew I'd have to, because if I didn't, the system that failed me would win. The courtroom's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as I gathered my files, the day's weight pressing into my shoulders. My wrist, wrapped in a bandage, throbbed beneath my robe, and a small adhesive strip on my temple hid the cut from this morning's encounter. At 44, I'd faced countless trials as a federal judge, but none had left me as unsteady as today's. Michael Johnson and Emily Carter, the couple who'd accosted me in the parking lot, had stood before me, oblivious to the irony. I'd ruled impartially, my voice steady, but inside I was unraveling. No police report existed. No security footage would surface. The system I'd served for 2 decades had looked away, leaving me to carry the sting of their dismissal alone. I slipped out the courthouse's back exit, the winter air sharp against my face. The lot was quiet, save for the hum of distant traffic on Franklin Avenue. I adjusted my coat, my breath visible, and started toward my car. Then I saw him, a man leaning against a lamppost, his gray suit crisp despite the late hour. He straightened as I approached, his brown hair catching the streetlight's glow. He was younger, maybe late 30s, with a face that held both resolve and hesitation. "Judge Ashford," he said, his voice low but clear. "I'm Lucas Bennett." I stopped, my hand tightening on my bag. "Do we know each other?" "Not directly," he said, stepping forward but keeping his distance. "I worked with Marshall, your legal counsel, 3 years ago. I was at the boutique this morning, in the parking lot." My stomach clenched, the memory of the crowd flashing back faces that watched, then turned away. "You were one of the bystanders," I said, my tone flat. "The ones who did nothing." He flinched, his jaw tightening, but he didn't look away. "Yes. I thought Vincent, the security chief, would handle it fairly. I knew him from a prior job. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I studied him, my years on the bench, sharpening my read of people." His eyes held regret, not deflection, but apologies were cheap. "Your sorry doesn't erase what happened," I said, my voice low. I was grabbed, pushed, accused of being a liar. and dismissed by a system I've spent my life upholding. I felt fear, Mr. Bennett, and no one, not you, not Vincent, did a thing. He nodded, absorbing my words. I know. I froze, and I'll carry that. But if you need a witness, someone to corroborate what happened, I'm here. No strings attached. I tilted my head, skepticism rising. Why now? Guilt? Or something else? He exhaled, his breath clouding in the cold. Because I don't want to be the guy who stays silent anymore. I saw what they did, Michael and Emily. I saw Vincent ignore you. I can't undo it, but I can speak up if you choose to pursue it. I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to dismiss him, to retreat to the safety of my solitude. I'd faced prejudice before subtle slights, overt insults, but this morning's raw injustice had shaken me. Lucas's offer, though, was a crack in the wall of indifference I'd met. I'll think about it, I said finally, turning toward my car. Don't expect me to trust you yet. I don't, he said, pulling a business card from his pocket and holding it out. My contact's here. Use it if you need me. I took the card, our fingers not touching, and drove home. That night, alone in my apartment, I sat with a glass of wine, Lucas's card on the table. The bandage on my wrist itched, a reminder of the morning's humiliation. I'd built a career on fairness, yet fairness had eluded me. Lucas's face lingered in my mind, the man in the gray suit from the crowd. The one who'd watched but stayed silent. His apology didn't heal the wound, but it was the first acknowledgement I'd received all day. I didn't trust him, not yet, but I couldn't deny the small spark of relief. Someone had seen me, even if too late. 3 days later, I stood at a podium in Columbia University's lecture hall, delivering a talk on judicial reform and unconscious bias. My voice was steady, but I wove in the morning's incident, stripping it to facts. A black woman, a judge, dismissed as a threat. The audience listened, some nodding, others shifting uncomfortably. When I finished, a man in the second row stood, clapping first. It was Lucas. Our eyes met, and for a moment I felt exposed, like he'd seen more than my words. Afterward he approached, his suit now navy, his expression earnest. Your speech was powerful, he said. It made me see my silence for what it was, cowardice. I raised an eyebrow, my guard still up. I don't need you to keep apologizing, Mr. Bennett. I need people to act when it matters. You're right, he said, his voice steady. I'm trying to start now. There's a nonprofit working on citizen oversight for law enforcement. They need legal advisors. I'd like you to meet them, if you're willing. No pressure? Just a chance to see there are people who want to stand with you. I studied him, the sincerity in his eyes clashing with my caution. He was 6 years younger, a white man in a world that rarely questioned him. Yet he was here, offering something I hadn't expected, a step towards alliance. Send me the details, I said, my tone neutral. I'll consider it. He nodded, a faint smile breaking through. Thank you, Judge. That evening, an email arrived, professional but personal, with a link to the nonprofit and a scanned article he'd written years ago on the right to be seen. At the bottom, a handwritten note. I don't know where to start, but I want to walk this path if you'll let me. I read it twice, my wine untouched. I'd spent the day feeling alone, but Lucas's persistence, quiet and unassuming, was a reminder that not everyone had turned away. I wasn't ready to trust him, not after one conversation, but I agreed to meet him at a cafe to discuss the nonprofit. Not because I believed in him yet, but because I needed to know if his words held weight, or if they'd crumble like the system that had failed me. The lecture hall at Columbia University hummed with the quiet intensity of academics and activists, their notebooks open as I stood at the podium. My voice carried through the room, steady and deliberate, weaving together statistics on judicial bias with the raw truth of my own experience. I spoke of the parking lot incident not as a victim, but as a judge who'd seen the system's blind spots up close. At 44, I'd learned to balance passion with precision, but today, my words felt heavier, laced with the ache of that morning's betrayal. The audience listened, some leaning forward, others scribbling notes. In the second row, Lucas Bennett sat, his navy suit crisp, his eyes locked on me with an intensity that made my pulse flicker. When I finished, the room erupted in applause, and Lucas was the first to stand, his clap steady, his gaze unwavering. I nodded briefly, my guard still up, but his presence lingered as I answered questions from the crowd. Afterward, as attendees dispersed, he approached, his steps measured. "Your speech wasn't just powerful," he said, his voice low. "It made me ashamed of my silence that day. I should have done more." I raised an eyebrow, adjusting my scarf. "I don't need you to keep apologizing, Mr. Bennett. I told you I need action, not regret." He nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "I'm trying. The nonprofit I mentioned, they're meeting this Thursday. I'd still like you to come, if you're willing. They'd benefit from your perspective, and I think you'd see there are people who want to fight alongside you." I studied him, his sincerity clashing with my caution. At 38, Lucas carried the ease of someone rarely questioned by the world. Yet here he was, seeking a path I'd walked alone for years. "I'll check my schedule," I said, my tone neutral. "No promises." "Fair enough," he said, his eyes warm but not pushy. "I'll send you the details." The email arrived that night, concise but thoughtful, with a link to the nonprofit's mission and a note. "Your voice matters more than you know. I hope you'll be there." I read it twice, my coffee growing cold. I'd spent years guarding my heart, my trust eroded by a world quick to judge. Lucas was different, but I wasn't ready to let him in, not yet. I went to the meeting, more out of curiosity than conviction. The nonprofit's office was a modest space in downtown DC, filled with young organizers and seasoned advocates. Lucas was there, not leading, but listening, his notebook open as he jotted down ideas. When I spoke, sharing insights from my judicial work, the room leaned in, and Lucas's quiet nod felt like a tether, grounding me. Afterward, we walked to a nearby diner, the winter chill biting through our coats. Over greasy fries, he told me about his childhood in a small Virginia town where prejudice was woven into daily life. "I didn't question it until law school," he said, his voice low. "I saw how the system chewed up people who looked like you, and I couldn't unsee it." I sipped my tea, my guard softening. "My mother was a teacher," I said, surprising myself. "She taught me justice isn't just laws. It's seeing people, really seeing them. That's why that morning hurt. No one saw me." He looked at me, his eyes steady. "I see you now, Sarah, and I'm not looking away." The words landed, warm and heavy, stirring something I hadn't felt in years. We started meeting more often, coffee after work, walks through DC's leaf-strewn parks, discussions about law and life. Lucas listened, not with the eagerness to fix, but with a quiet respect that made me feel heard. One evening, as we stood by the Lincoln Memorial, the city's lights reflecting on the Potomac, he said, "I don't want to save you, Sarah. I want to stand beside you, if you'll let me. Not because of guilt, but because I believe in what you're fighting for." I didn't answer right away, my heart caught between hope and fear. At 44, I'd built walls to protect myself, and Lucas, 6 years younger, from a world that never questioned him, was asking to cross them. "It's been a long time since someone saw me as more than a judge," I said finally, my voice soft. "I'm not sure I know how to let them." He smiled, his hand brushing mine for a moment. "I'm patient." The connection grew, not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments, sharing articles, debating policy, laughing over bad diner coffee. I felt safe with him, a rarity in a life spent proving my worth. But the gap between us, age, race, experience, loomed in my mind. I'd faced judgment before, and I knew stepping closer to Lucas meant inviting more. Still, when he suggested co-teaching a community class on racial equity and law in Brooklyn, I agreed. "It's a start," I said, my smile tentative but real. As we left the park, the city's hum around us, I felt a shift. Lucas wasn't just a witness to my pain. He was becoming a partner, someone who saw the woman behind the robe. I wasn't ready to name what we had, but I wanted him in my life, and that was enough for now. The world hadn't changed, but with him beside me, it felt a little less heavy, a little more possible. The hum of my office was a familiar comfort, the soft clatter of my keyboard, a rhythm that grounded me. At 44, I'd built a sanctuary here, a place where justice was my anchor. But that morning, as I drove to the courthouse, my phone buzzed relentlessly, each notification a jab at my calm. A colleague's text was the first I opened. "Sarah, have you seen the video? Call me." My stomach dropped. I pulled into the parking lot, my hands trembling as I clicked the link. The footage was grainy, a silent clip from a boutique hallway camera. It showed me stumbling backward, Michael Johnson's hand on my arm, my body hitting the metal door. The context was stripped away, no audio of Emily's accusations, no glimpse of Vincent's dismissal. The caption read, "Woman overreacts in parking dispute. Truth or drama?" Within hours, it had spread, amplified by news outlets with headlines like "Judge accused of playing race card." Comment sections churned with venom, questioning my integrity, my role as a federal judge. I sat in my car, the winter air seeping through the window, my breath shallow. The wound from that morning had scabbed over, but this tore it open, raw and stinging. I closed my office door, the blinds drawn, and tried to focus on case files. But the phone kept buzzing messages from friends, assistants, even strangers. "Stay strong, Sarah. Are you suing? Why didn't you fight back?" Each word pressed harder on the bruise of that day, when I'd been dismissed as less than human. I'd faced prejudice before, but this was different, a public dissection of my pain, twisted into a narrative that painted me as the aggressor. A knock broke my spiral. Lucas Bennett stood in the doorway, his navy coat dusted with snow, his face tight with concern. "Sarah, I saw the video," he said, stepping inside. "We need to respond. A press conference, a statement, something to set the record straight." I looked at him, my guard rising. At 38, Lucas carried a sincerity I'd come to trust. But now, doubt crept in. "A press conference," I said, my voice sharp. "And say what, Lucas? That I was pushed, ignored, humiliated? The world's already decided what I am." He sat across from me, his hands clasped. "We can tell the truth. I was there. I'll stand with you. Corroborate everything." I leaned back, my bandaged wrist aching under the desk. "Do you know what happens when a white man steps up to defend a black woman? People don't just listen. They question. Why is he involved? What's she to him? And if I call you a friend, they'll dig deeper." "Just a friend?" they'll ask. And suddenly, we're not talking about justice anymore. Lucas's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "I know it's not simple, but I can't stay silent again. Not like that morning. Let me help. Help? I said, my voice cracking. Or is this about you, Lucas? Absolving your guilt, proving you're one of the good ones. He flinched, his eyes darkening. That's not fair, Sarah. I'm here because I believe in you, because what happened was wrong. I'm not trying to fix my conscience. I'm trying to stand beside you. I stood, pacing to the window, the city's gray skyline blurring through my anger. You don't get it. Standing beside me means stepping into a fire you've never felt. It means questions, judgment, assumptions about us, about what we are. Are you ready for that? Because I've been carrying it my whole life. He rose, his voice soft but firm. I'm ready to face it, whatever it costs. But you're right. I don't know what it's like to walk in your shoes. Tell me what you need, and I'll do it. Or I'll back off. Your call. I turned, my throat tight. His sincerity was a lifeline, but it also scared me. I let him in through coffee, walks, shared dreams of a fairer world. And now the world was watching, ready to twist our connection into something ugly. At 44, I'd learned to protect myself, to keep my heart behind walls. Lucas, 6 years younger, from a world that rarely challenged him, was asking me to lower them, and I wasn't sure I could. Michael and Emily's faces flashed in my mind, their dismissal a reminder of how quickly trust could turn to betrayal. I need time, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I need to figure this out alone. Lucas nodded, his expression heavy. I'll wait. Call me when you're ready. Or don't. But I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to. He left, the door closing softly behind him. I sank into my chair, silence deafening. The video played in my mind, a loop of that morning's pain. I'd built my life on justice, but justice wasn't a shield. It was a mirror, reflecting every flaw in the world I served. Lucas had become my ally, maybe more, but letting him closer meant risking scrutiny I'd spent years deflecting. I looked at my bandaged wrist, the faint scar beneath, and wondered if I was pushing away the one person who'd chosen to see me, or protecting the only thing I had left myself. Spring crept into Washington, D.C. with a tentative warmth, the cherry blossoms along the Potomac hinting at renewal. A month had passed since the video's venomous spread, since I'd pushed Lucas away, demanding time to untangle my heart. The scandal faded, as scandals do, swallowed by the internet's churn. Michael Johnson and Emily Carter quietly left the city, their names tied to whispers of shame. Vincent Corso, the security chief, was reassigned, his absence a silent admission of fault. No one apologized. No charges were filed. The system I'd served for 2 decades remained unchanged, and I carried that truth like a stone in my chest. At 44, I'd learned justice wasn't always a gavel strike. It was a quiet, personal fight, waged in the shadows of indifference. I returned to my routine, presiding over cases with the same measured calm, my robe a shield against the world's gaze. But something had shifted. My smiles were rarer, my evenings longer, spent staring at the city's skyline from my apartment window. The wound from that morning in the parking lot had healed, leaving a faint scar on my wrist, but the deeper cut, the betrayal of being unseen, lingered. I hadn't called Lucas. His last words, his promise to wait, echoed, but I'd held back, afraid of what letting him in would cost. Then I reopened my class on law and racial equity in a small Brooklyn community center, a project I'd shelved years ago. Every Saturday, I stood before a mix of students, activists, and locals, teaching the mechanics of justice while unraveling its flaws. The room was a refuge, a place where my voice felt whole. One morning, I noticed a familiar figure in the front row, his notebook open, his pen moving steadily. Lucas Bennett, in a simple sweater, his brown hair catching the light. He didn't speak unless called on, didn't seek attention, but his presence was a constant, quiet, unshakable. He came every week, asking questions that cut to the heart of systemic bias, his eyes meeting mine with a respect that felt like more than alliance. When I posed a challenge, who will stand for the voiceless when no one else does? His hand was the first to rise, his voice steady. I will, if they'll have me. The room nodded, but I felt his words land squarely on me. A promise rooted in that morning he'd failed to act. After class one day, he lingered, helping stack chairs as the others left. You're good at this, he said, his tone light. You make people think without making them feel small. I smiled, a rare warmth breaking through. It's all I've got left some days. He paused, his gaze soft. It's more than enough, Sarah. The moment passed, but it stayed with me. Lucas didn't push, didn't ask for forgiveness again. He was simply there, week after week, a steady presence that chipped at my walls. I began to see him not as a bystander who'd faltered, but as the man who'd chosen to stay, to learn, to listen. At the end of the semester, a small package arrived at my office. No sender's name. Inside was a photograph, grainy but clear, taken from a distance that winter morning. It didn't show Michael's grip or Emily's sneer, nor my stumble against the metal door. Instead, it captured Lucas, standing at the edge of the crowd, his fists clenched, his face turned toward me, torn between inaction and resolve. A note was tucked beneath, written in blue ink. I didn't step forward that day, but today I'll stay if you'll let me. I held the photo, my throat tight. At 44, I'd built a life on solitude, trusting only myself to carry the weight of my battles. Lucas, 6 years younger, from a world that rarely challenged him, had seen me not the judge, not the symbol, but the woman who'd stood alone. He hadn't promised to fix the world, only to walk beside me, and that was enough to shift something deep within. I learned then that justice isn't always a verdict. Sometimes it's the quiet courage of someone who chooses to stay. Lucas didn't erase the pain of that morning, but his presence taught me that connection, fragile, imperfect, could heal wounds the law couldn't touch. I didn't know what we were, friends, allies, or something unspoken, but I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I slipped the photo into the drawer where I kept my most significant case files, a private archive of moments that mattered. As I stepped out of the classroom that final Saturday, Lucas waited in the hall, his coat slung over his arm. See you next week? He asked, his smile tentative. I nodded, my own smile small but real. Next week. Outside, Brooklyn buzzed with the first signs of spring, the air soft with possibility. I didn't know if Lucas and I would ever be more than this two people bound by a shared fight, a shared scar. But as I walked into the sunlight, his footsteps steady beside me, I felt something bloom, quiet and new. Not love, not yet, but trust, a fragile seed, planted in the space where justice and humanity meet. It was enough, for now, to know someone had chosen to stay.